Hello friends, I'm Rob, this is Digital Wastrel, and in this video we're going back to the old school because I'm going to paint one of the oldest miniatures I own, the RTB002 Space Orc Raider. Maybe I should rename the channel Analog Wastrel. 10th edition Warhammer 40,000 just came out, and as someone who's been playing since 1st edition Rogue Trader, I thought this was a perfect opportunity to look back on something a little bit old-fashioned. Now, this is not the first miniature I ever bought, which was a metal Eldar jet bike, and it's not the oldest miniature I've ever owned, which was probably some kind of Space Marine, but it is the oldest miniature in my collection right now. Probably. As far as I can tell, this guy is from the 1987 box set Space Orc Raiders. To get specific, I think he is Orc with Bolter 3. The 3 Rogue Trader era Orc books are some of my absolute favourites, and they really shaped my ideas about what 40k should be. Their blend of crazy sci-fi ideas and dumb British humour really cemented Orcs as my absolute favourite faction. Sorry, Emperor's Children, Craftworld Eldar, Iron Hands, Necrons, Blood Elves from WoW, Skeksis, Brotherhood of Nod. Recently, my friend Josh from the Crown of Command podcast did a retrospective on the Waaargh the Orks book, and it really got the old nostalgia squigs excited. When I migrated away from the UK a number of years ago, most of my old collection got sold off. Since then, I've picked up a bit of an eclectic selection of first edition miniatures, mostly from spur-of-the-moment eBay purchases, and I thought this would be a great chance to get some of them painted. If you're interested in me turning this into a full series, as I build an entire Rogue Trader Orc army, leave me a comment down below and tell me you want to see it. I know loads of Oldhammer fans love to stick to era-appropriate paint schemes, but personally I'm a fan of old models painted up in a more modern palette. So I'm going to be painting this guy in the same style as my current Orc army. The skin recipe is my knockoff version of the technique laid out by Quarterpaint over on Instagram. They are, for my money, one of the most inspirational Orc hobbyists active at the moment. Their skin recipe involves airbrushing and a certain level of skill, neither of which I possess. So I present to you my cheap, half-assed version. First of all, pull out your big jar of Orks. You do have a big jar of Orks, don't you? Grab your Orc from the murky depths. Ah, a fire dragon. Back to the depths with you. Don't worry kids, it's okay to use your bare hands to reach into tubs of chemicals. It keeps my skin looking youthful and healthy. This Orc was an eBay rescue and had some chunky primer, so we're going to need to give him a good scrub down with some soap and an old toothbrush. Next, it's important to assert dominance over other Oldhammer hobbyists by snipping off the slaughter base. Just kidding. I have a 32mm slaughter base around here somewhere. Ah, thank you, Blood Bowl. There are some gaps in it, so I mixed up some epoxy putty to bulk out the base. Then I put on some Vallejo pumice for texture. We're in the middle of rainy season here in Japan, so I opted to prime him with a brush. Plus, it kind of fits the old school vibe, right? I usually prime my Orcs in white, but black is easier with a brush, and honestly my skill level isn't high enough for it to make much of a difference. There's a lot of Orcs to paint, so it's better to get them done quickly rather than worrying about the details. Base the ground with Xandri dust. I like to base my figures first, because I think it's easier to tidy up the ground than it is to tidy up the bottom parts of the miniature. Block in the skin with Waaargh flesh. Next, I'm going to do all the browns and the greys for the clothing. I won't show you the specific paints that I use because I just wing it each time. Variety, yeah. This model has a big furry shoulder and also kind of a furry loincloth. The detail on these are pretty shallow because it's such an old model, but we're going to do it with sky grey. And then after the sky grey, I'm going to give it a wash with Griff Charger Grey, which is a contrast paint. Next, I block in the blue parts, which is my main army colour. I use Vallejo Ultramarine Blue, but you could use Calgar Blue or whatever it is the Citadel uses for Ultramarines. Orks need a little bit of freehand, so for this model I'm going to paint on some dags or little triangles on the blue shoulder pad. I'm using Vallejo Sky Grey for this. Next, paint all the metals with Lead Belcher. And the gold parts are going to be Retributor Armour. After this, wash everything with Null Oil. And all the gold and brown bits in Brown Wash. This is also a great time to do brown wash all over the base. I'll go back to the shoulder pad and add a little bit of metal to these chips to make it look weathered. Once all the washes are dry, I go back to each of the colours and I highlight it again in the original colour. If I'm mass painting a whole squad of Ork boys, I'll probably skip this step, but because this guy is a bit of a special case, I'm going to highlight each of the base coat colours with the same colour, and then for some of them I'm going to add in a little bit of ivory and do a final little pop highlight. With the clothes and the gun all done, it's time to move on to the final part of the Ork, the skin. Of course it's best to tidy up the skin with Waaargh flesh because some of the washes or other paints might have got on there if your hands are shaky like mine. Firstly, we go in with Warboss Green as a heavy highlight. Again, if you're mass painting a whole mob of boys, you can do a kind of a rough dry brush for this, but because the model's so small and the texture isn't so big, I'm doing more of a rough highlight. But you know, do whatever works for you. Then a more detailed highlight with Skarsnik Green, or for dry brushes you can do a very light dry brush on top of this. Next, to bring attention to some of the details, I take Rackarth flesh and I do a little bit of that on his knuckles, his elbows, the inside of his ears and on his lips. It looks a bit cartoonish at the moment, but don't worry, we're gonna make it look better. Next step is the wash, and we hit the whole skin with an Arthonian, how do you say that? Arthonian camo shade. What a name, eh? You can see once the wash is dry, that Rackarth flesh has really been toned down and it looks a lot more natural. The final steps for the skin are to highlight 2 more times, once with Skarsnik Green, and then a final highlight just on the very top parts with Skarsnik Green and Pallid Witch Flesh, about 50-50 mix. To finish the miniature off, then we go in and we paint any little details, such as the teeth. Then we dry brush a couple of browns, lighter browns over the base, and rim it in black, as is good and proper. And then that's it, the model's done. Let's have a look at what he looks like when he's done. So there he is. Not the best paint job, but I think I'm pretty happy with him. I think he'll look quite nice amongst my more modern Orks. Just for fun, here he is next to a 2nd edition plastic Goth and also the long haul multi-part Ork kit. If you like this video and want to see me paint my way through an entire Rogue Trader Orc army, and maybe even play a first edition game of Warhammer 40,000, yeah, leave me a comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.